Feed the soil, not the plant. That's the absolute #1 topic you need to understand to be successful as a gardener. Hey guys, it's Daryl, Louisiana Simple Living. Thanks for coming back to the channel. So the topic today is feed the soil, not the plants. Feed the soil, not the plant is kind of a obvious thing I'm trying to describe, but not everybody understands about soil, the health of the soil, the organisms that are in the soil, and how they all come together in a symbiotic relationship to make your plants grow and have a good harvest. So modern farming is kind of take a destructive approach to farming. There's lots of tilling, plowing. They use synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, monocropping, which is basically growing the same crop in the same area all the time. All those things have kind of led to destruction of the soil and the soil's health, which makes you put more fertilizer next time. It makes you do all of those things again and again. Otherwise your garden or your farm wouldn't be as productive as it should be. What does commercial farming have to do with what I'm doing in my backyard? You may be doing some of the same things in your backyard. You're tilling up your soil. You're using 13-13-13, that's kind of, or 20-20-20 NPK fertilizer. Those are synthetic fertilizers. You may be using 7-Dust, those kinds of more harsh pesticides that build up over time. You may be using a fungicide, which builds up over time, which really affects the organisms in the soil. So we do some of these kind of things not realizing I did that as well. I actually used some 13-13-13 out here. I'd throw it out in the garden. I'd plowed my rows, did all those things, used 7-Dust. I see a new way to do it, and a more sustainable way to do it, more organic way to do it, more healthy. And hopefully through this video I can show you the same thing. So again, feed the soil, not the plant. It will provide nutrients that is needed for the plant. So first what we're going to talk about is about soil, just so you can understand the dynamics that go on between the organisms and soil and what soil really is made up of. Then we'll talk about the organisms in the soil and how that directly affects the health of your plants. And finally, kind of bring that all together as to why does that matter. This information is extremely important to not only new gardeners, but ones who have been doing it a long time. There's a newer, safer, sustainable way to do our garden, and that's what I want to make sure we get across to everybody. Don't forget, I got my Spring 101 series. That was 11 videos put together last year that takes you through the whole process of planting your garden, sowing seeds, planting your seedlings, all through the process. So check that out, Spring Garden 101. Please go ahead and subscribe. That means a lot to the channel. If you enjoy the video, like that video and feel free to share it. Let's get started. All right, so we're going to talk briefly about soil and kind of what soil is, how it all works together, so you can have a good understanding from a soil health standpoint. So what is soil? So at its most basic definition, soil is nothing more than weathered rock, minerals, organic matter, water, and air all together. So it's about 45% of the mineral content, 20 to 30% air, 20 to 30% oxygen, and about 5% of organic matter. With 45% of the mineral or weathered rock portion is sand, clay, or silt. So the important point about the organic matter, whether it's humus or compost, it's organically active. It's alive. It's not just a substance or material that's sitting on the ground not doing anything. So there's countless organisms, microorganisms, invertebrates, earthworms, all those kind of things, bacteria and fungi that work together to provide nutrients to roots of plants. Now, because the organic matter is always being broken down, and where we have plants that are heavy nutrient users, we have to replenish that organic matter to keep that soil health chemistry where it needs to be. That's why we amend our soil each season, or at least each year, as we need to. Now, organic matter does not break down overnight. That's why we have to keep amending the soil. And as that organic material breaks down, that's where it provides nutrients. It works with fungi and other things in the soil that allow those nutrients to be absorbed into those roots. All plant nutrients except for carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen are provided through your soil. It's important to remember that part of it. And of course, your organic matter binds the soil together and allows structure within your soil. So native soil is roughly 50% pore space, whether you got macro pores or micropores. These are all those tunnels that go through the soil So if you look at a sponge, you got all these different channels, some bigger, some smaller, macro and micro pores. If you think of your soil, it has tunnels like this all through it. So those tunnels allow oxygen as well as water to go down into your soil. It also allows carbon dioxide up through the soil and out into the atmosphere. So pore space, think about your sponge, your macro and micro pores. So soil organisms are our natural primary recyclers, taking dead organic content, water, carbon dioxide, oxygen, that whole process to convert that dead organic matter into nutrients that fuel our plants in our garden. So the water in the soil makes up about 20 to 30% of the volume. Water is retained as thin films in the soil as well as in some of the pores until it drains out and of course or is used. The major loss of water is respiration from the plant, but evaporation coming out of the top. That's the primary thing that makes you lose water. That's why mulching is so valuable. It helps keep the evaporation down, as well as it does help feed some of the organisms in the soil, as well as support the soil chemistry, the things that it needs to be healthy. Now soil aeration takes up about 20-30% of your soil as well, and that air is in those macropores or micropores that are not filled up with water. And that's important that, again, you're able to have oxygen come in, carbon dioxide come out. So for plant growth and activity, the aeration, having that water in your micropores or macropores in your soil is just as important as the moisture. You got to be able to get it in and out and allow it to drain. And there's a continuous release of CO2 coming out and oxygen going in. All right, that's a quick overview of soil. Now let's talk about soil organisms. But when we say feed the soil, we're actually saying is feed those soil organisms, the fungi, the invertebrates, all those microorganisms. We're feeding that, which is in turn going to feed our plants. So again, important, soil is abound with life. And besides the plant roots, earthworms, all those things you can see visibly, there's hundreds and hundreds of thousands and millions of microorganisms that you can't see that is in your soil growing, many of them beneficial for your plants. So like a single gram of soil contains over millions of microorganisms. And those microorganisms are much more located or focused around the root areas of plants. In our case, it'd be our vegetable plants, or fruit plants, or flowers in our garden soil. And that's the rhizosphere area of the soil. And so those microorganisms, as they break down organic matter, it creates energy, it creates nutrients, and carbon dioxide that gets expelled throughout the pores. One of the most critical beneficial microorganisms is mycorrhiza. So that's a fungus that collects around the root areas of your plants, and it actually infects your plants. But what that does, it allows your roots to draw in the nutrients into the roots, which supports the plant. And it's a mutually symbiotic relationship. They benefit each other. Another really beneficial organism that's in your soil is earthworms. I've actually done a video and I'll put a link on that below. They provide a heck of a lot of benefits for your soil. They create macropores all throughout, which we've already talked about is important for movement of air and water in your soil. So as they feed, they leave worm castings in your soil, which is one of the best, absolute best organic amendments you can put in your soil. There are volunteer farmers, so to speak, so they provide a lot of benefits to us without us even having to do anything to support them. And of course, not all organisms are good. There are pathogens that are bad. So you got scab potatoes, there's nematodes that are bad, and even slugs and snails is a type that may be kind of negative towards our plants. Now the activity of that soil and the way it can break down depends upon the moisture, the air being able to access it, temperature, as well as the amount of organic matter that's in the soil. That's why we say feed the soil and not the plant. So there are many routine activities we do in the garden that can have a detrimental effect on our soil and our soil chemistry. We'll talk about that in a second. Whereas some practices actually feeds the soil, like we talk about, whether it be adding compost, mulching, organic pesticides if we have to do anything, but staying organic without affecting the soil chemistry. So as mentioned, there's a number of detrimental things we do out in the garden that can affect your soil chemistry. We kind of talked about the commercial farmers and things they do. In the backyard, we may be doing some of those same things. So what I want to talk about here is 4 key activities that especially new gardeners don't realize, which I'm one of them at the point I was a new gardener, right? So I was using synthetic fertilizer, I was tilling the soil, all those kind of things. So let's talk about that. So those 4 things is tillage, synthetic fertilizers, monocropping, and pesticides. So first is tillage. So when I started my backyard, it's really heavily clay, silty backyard, hard. So I'd get out and I'd borrow my dad's tiller, bring it over here, and I mean, just work my behind off trying to get that ground tore all up. There's a lot of work, but what you do in that process is you tear up all those macro and micro pores. You kill a significant number of earthworms. And so some of the tillage that you do really has a negative impact on your garden, on a sustainable garden long term. So when you do till, of course, it breaks up the soil, but it also kind of accelerates decomposition of the organic matter in your soil, because you're mixing it around, you're getting oxygen all to it. But it accelerates it faster than you really want. So when we say feed the soil, when we put compost, organic matter in the garden, it's not going to immediately affect the plants just like it would with the synthetic fertilizer. It increases the threat of erosion and destroys the habitat of the beneficial organisms like earthworms. So again, when I started my backyard, it was I was tilling traditional rows. That was the only way I knew how. That was the way my dad had always done it. That's the way a lot of people were doing it at that time. Heck, it's a lot of hard work too. So that's why I kind of started looking for better, more healthy ways, sustainable ways to keep my garden going. And that's where we're at with raised beds, using organic products, organic fertilizer, using compost, organic pesticides if we have to use pesticides, which we try not to as well. And today with these raised beds, I never walk in them, so you never have to till them. So actually I double dug underneath where each one of the raised beds are at, then filled in soil on top of it with my mix of organic materials. That's the way I have my garden. It's organic, healthy, sustainable, and no-till. And next, let's talk about synthetic fertilizer. All plants need nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, the NPK, to be healthy. Now what we want to talk about is how we're getting that NPK, the nutrients, to our plants. And so those macronutrients, along with the micronutrients, determine whether your plant's going to be healthy or not, whether your harvest is going to be bountiful or not. So when we do apply these synthetic fertilizer, it typically does make your plants jump, right? And so what it does, it actually makes your plants grow faster than they should. So what you get is plants that are, the cell structure is affected, they're thin-walled, and they're more susceptible to pests and disease. But this is exactly the opposite of what I'm trying to tell you to do. If you put synthetic fertilizer, you are absolutely feeding the plant and it's going to respond, as opposed to feeding the soil over time, which has all the nutrients your plants need to be successful. Excessive amounts of fertilizer in your soil can also be extremely negative, affecting your soil chemistry. So at least nitrates or salts in your soil, that has a detrimental effect on the chemistry that creates runoff and other issues. And over time, as we put more and more synthetic fertilizer, that buildup stays there. You'll get runoff as well. I mean, we're not talking about, I don't have a big creek or river behind my house, but I really don't want nitrates and salt runoff in my yard either. So there are organic alternatives to using those synthetic fertilizers. Number one is using compost and organic matter. You could continue amending, and you're going to continue putting nutrients into your soil. Some will get used, but you're going to put new nutrients in. There's also liquid types of organic fertilizers, such as seaweed and kelp, fish emulsion. Those are some really good products, the ones that I use. And that's not going to give you an immediate jump in 24 hours. I guess it takes somewhere 3 to 5-7 days, something like that, before you actually see a huge increase, because it takes it in just a little bit slower. Synthetic fertilizers are manufactured or made chemically so that it can be in a readily available form almost immediate as you apply it. Whereas organic matter, compost, the nutrients have to be converted. With a liquid organic fertilizer, again, you're looking at 4 or 5 days or so before you really get it absorbed into your plant. That's okay for me versus having nitrates in my soil and maybe having thin-walled plants that aren't going to do that well. And again, in my garden, I'm staying organic. I use nothing but organic matter, compost, copious amounts of compost, the fish emulsion, seaweed, kelp, that kind of type of organic fertilizer. Mulch, so leaf mulch is actually something you can add that feeds earthworms. It feeds some of the organisms in your soil, and it draws them into that area because they love leaf mold, as well as mulch in general. So all those are great things to do for your garden, and it keeps you from having to use these harsh fertilizers, synthetic fertilizers that leave chemical nitrates and so forth in your garden. So again, focus on feeding the soil and not the plant. So another activity we often do in our backyard garden is monocropping. Monocropping means we're putting the same exact type of plant, or even in the plant family, in the same location season after season after season. That's easier said than done, especially if you just got a little 4x5 raised bed. But if you got a garden such as I got here with various raised beds, I make a point, I intersperse the different plants around the garden so they're not all collected together of one type, which really leads to problems with pests and things like disease, easily jumping to another plant right beside it. But I also try to make sure I move everything around so that I don't have a tomato where I had a tomato last time, or a tomatillo last season, or I don't have a squash where I had a squash last season. Again, it's easier said than done. But it is something that's an important part of the arsenal that we can do to make sure that we have the right nutrients in our soil. Because what happens if you plant the same one over and over, the same type over and over, it's going to deplete. It has its own specific requirements for macro and micronutrients. It's going to extract year after year that same exact menu of nutrients. So it's going to deplete that. So if we move it around, each plant has its own type of needs from a nutrient standpoint, and it doesn't deplete the soil as fast in that one area of nutrients. Again, this can be difficult if you got a small garden, but it's critically important you do that if possible. Move them around and give your chance a better chance for your soil chemistry and nutrients to be at its optimum. And finally, pesticides, whether you're trying to control weeds, insects, fungi, or anything of that nature. The more and more we apply those harsh synthetic pesticides, they tend to stay in your garden bed. They'll build up over time, and then you got runoff and environmental issues there for one problem, but you're also going to be damaging some of the organisms that are in the soil, and that's what we don't want to have. So the pesticide residues stay in the soil, they build up over time, and they cause damage to your chemistry of the soil. There's runoff of the pesticide. There's damage potentially to beneficial insects or your microorganisms. And the crazy thing about some of these pesticides, synthetic pesticides, in the state that they're in is bad, but some of the specific components that break down in the residue, really even worse for you or the garden. So another reason why I stay away from synthetic type of pesticides. See, I use neem oil, BT against worms or caterpillars. Those are all organic types of products, and I stick to that. And I use mulching to control weeds. That's a natural way of doing it on my walkways as well as in the raised beds. It works. Is it perfect? No, you get grass that comes up through it. You get grass that grows in the raised beds. You just pick them out. You just got to come out here and do it. But it's safe, sustainable, and healthy. And so remember, feed the soil, not the plant. All right, so why is all this important? Why is it important to me? I want my garden to be organic. I want it to be sustainable. I want to be healthy as I can be. I want to eat the most delicious vegetables in the world. To do that, you take care of the soil, and the soil will take care of the plants. You look in my garden, it's healthy. I don't use any synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, those kind of things. It just ain't necessary if we do our garden right and we treat our soil right, get our chemistry right. That's all we got to do. And just remember the use of synthetic fertilizers. You're doing tilling. If you're using pesticides, harsh pesticides, 7-dust, any of that kind of stuff, and you don't move your crops around, so you do monocropping, all those things lead to an effect on your soil chemistry and soil health, which directly results in problems with your plants. Once I learned this, I know better, and hopefully the explanation helps you understand there's a better way than using all the synthetic stuff and be organic and have a healthy garden. That may be an issue for you if you are doing that in your backyard garden. So take what I'm talking here to heart. Think about it. Do you want to be organic? Do you want to be sustainable and have an easier gardening, to be honest? Think about that and think about applying some of the things I talked about to be more successful and sustainable in your garden. So hey, thanks for coming back out to Louisiana Simple Living again today. Really enjoyed this video. It's something that's really, as you can tell, passionate to myself. It's a lessons I've learned over a number of years of gardening. It's a very good approach to gardening that I'm extremely happy that we've been able to do here at my garden, and it's something you can do at your garden as well. So again, the soil is truly the foundation for you having squash, tomatoes, cucumbers, all those things you want to grow. The soil is the foundation for that. You want to feed the soil, not the plant. And so to kind of recap, what do you need to do? Make sure your soil has plenty of organic matter. Give it compost, amend compost on a seasonal basis. Avoid monocropping. Move your plants around when you can. Again, that's difficult if you got a small garden, but when you can, move them around. Avoid those synthetic fertilizers. Use organic fertilizers like kelp, fish emulsion, seaweed. Those are great. Use compost tea as another alternative that actually I'm getting ready to try that. I haven't ever used compost tea, but I'm told it works fairly well. I'm getting ready to give that a try. It'll be on a video upcoming. But there are natural organic ways to get your crops to grow that you don't have to apply these chemicals, and it keeps you and your garden healthy. Don't forget about mulching as well. Mulching is a great way to help feed your soil, feed your organisms, as well as there's other benefits from keeping your soil moist and not losing out on that evaporation, things of that nature. Mulching, especially leaf mold, those kind of things are great for your soil. And whatever you do, avoid tilling your soil, and of course limit synthetic pesticides. Use organic if you have to. The idea is to try to avoid it using other means. Interdispersing plants, you may have some spacing between different kinds of plants. You may have a lure kind of plant out there that you don't mind. You know a particular caterpillar loves that kind of plant, put it out there. He'll probably go there first instead of going elsewhere. Then you got time to go ahead and take care of them. So different ways you can handle organic type of pesticides or organic types of pest control. And if necessary with the if you got some bug problems, use neem oil or BT for caterpillars. Those two products in and of itself do wonders. It's not like 7-dust. It doesn't just kill them right out, but it does do a good job within a couple days of BT, like a couple days, 2 or 3 days, it'll kill the caterpillars. So it does a pretty good job of helping manage pests in your garden. So remember, feed the soil and not the plant. And don't forget about my Spring Garden 101 series. It's 11 videos put together last year that goes all through the sowing seeds, planting seedlings, amending your soil, all that, and even putting in a new raised bed. So check that out. It's very informative. If you haven't yet, please subscribe, like this video. And so subscribing does wonders for the channel. Remember, if you subscribe, it means a lot to me, and I really like when you share it as well. So feel free to share. As I always remind you, take the time to make memories with family and friends. Make memories now. And as always, I will see you on the next video.